It's another Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday, Scout has come to help me. Hopefully he will not disconnect my microphone with his hugeness. Hello, Scouty baby. You want to say hi? We're just delaying the inevitable. Like, what's going on? Why is there cats? Yeah, this is what happens on my channel. But yeah, we are breaking the seal on this mofo, talking that Hughie scene on The Boys, and kink and consent. And this is inspired by two things. One, the internet in general, but also some journalists missing the point of that scene. But also a comment I got on Friday, on the video on Friday, that I thought was really well put. And it was just a chance to say it was, I'm very concerned about how kink, I'm in excerpt to make sense in this context, concerned about how kink is involved to damn people like Neil Gaiman. Kink is between consenting adults. The mere fact that someone likes rough sex, domination, or degradation says nothing about whether there was consent or not. Very often in these stories, a preference for kink is taken as a gotcha, and that wasn't the take I was taking on the video. It was just sort of an aside. And I did think the point was apt. And so when this Boys episode came along, and it's like, all right, this is the same thing, that people are seeing a scene where the participants are believing it to be consensual kink. Just because it's kink, people are like, they sexually assaulted him. Now, to be clear, there was an attempt at, casting Hughie as a lead in a remade Videodrome, but that wasn't completed. It was stopped before they got there. That would have been sexual assault, because at that point, Tech Knight knew it was Hughie. But before Hughie was unmasked, as far as they knew, that was Webweaver, who had signed up for a kink session with Tech Knight and Ashley, and, had figured out a safe word and everything. That's not sexual assault. Hughie was the one that actually broke consent by impersonating Webweaver. This is challenging. If you like this content, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. Okay, where is the outrage coming from? It's coming from, based on the people who jumped on me on Twitter, an interview that Eric Kripke gave to Variety, where, okay, he didn't express his point well, but he was being glib because it is The Boys. You're not supposed to come at The Boys from a sensitive place. I am not saying it would not be okay to depict a sexual assault of a man in media, and that's a bit of a side. I do believe that some people are treating this as never okay to show, and I think that's wrong, but one thing at a time here. Okay, here's the quote that people are bugging out and getting outraged about. Okay, this was an interview in Variety. Here we go. Let's start with the Tech Knight sex dungeon part. Where did the idea come for it? And why bring Hughie into this situation now, kicking him when he's down by having him sexually assaulted by his childhood hero after his dad just died? And Eric Kripke responds, well, that's a dark way to look at it. We view it as hilarious. And it goes, but it's that reference to it being hilarious that people are bugging out about. Now let's break this scene down. Okay. Obviously, spoilers are to follow. There have been spoilers before this, but I've spoiler tagged the video. Okay. Hughie is impersonating kind of a D-list Spider-Man ripoff called Webweaver, right down to the point where the costume is really stinky to conceal the fact that it's not him. He's using this to infiltrate an oligarch meeting involving Homelander, Sister Sage, Firecracker, and Victoria Newman in a very racist take on Wayne Manor. Obviously, this is a commentary on the wealthier, sort of Jeffrey Epstein Island attendees section of American society who look down their noses and say, oh, morality, but they're doing some fucked up shit behind closed doors. Let me tell you, this shit does happen. It actually made me sympathize for just a moment with Victoria in that moment where she was imagining her own head exploding. But Hughie infiltrates, is successfully mistaken for Webweaver, and taken down to a sex dungeon where Tech Knight and Ashley and a butler and someone in a gimp suit are awaiting what they believe is a prearranged consensual tickle kink session, bondage and tickle kink session. Now, because they thought it was Webweaver and Webweaver had consented, that's not assault. Now, because it was actually Hughie, he might feel very violated after the fact, but he was actually there under false pretenses, and that's not cool in BDSM and kink circles. Like, that there is actually a violation. You don't spy on someone's kinky play and record it to use it against them, because he was planting bugs in Tech Knight's version of very racist Wayne Manor. Now, that's why it's not a cut and dried sexual assault scene, and why Eric Kripke rightly was okay with playing it for laughs, because it's Hughie biting off more than he can chew and calling back to a section in the comics where Hughie puts on a superhero suit to do an infiltration mission. Apparently Jack Quaid specifically asked for that to be included in the show. And, Eric Kripke was saying, be careful what you ask for the writers on this show. And I do think that the scene up until Hughie's unmasking was intended to be kink, not sexual assault. And the commenter is right that too many people are confusing the two. When, it'd be one thing if they were playing sexual assault for laughs. It would be, but what it really was a callback to, Ashley's dom kink and a fart cake reference. And I'm sorry to confess that I knew that reference. I've seen the original video because I like to torture myself. And I should declare at this point, I don't engage in this kind of kink. I know people who do. I'm okay with it. I'm not offended by it. I just don't do it. I actually think that it's fascinating and I feel like when people trust me enough to talk about that is a very vulnerable thing for them, which is why we talk about kink shaming. I mean, for somebody to be self-aware enough to know that something atypical arouses them, and I mean, let's face it, they were, Ashley was engaging in a fetish that she believed Webweaver liked. Like, we don't see her doing the tickle stuff in her previous dom sessions. So she's getting something out of it. He's getting something out of it. Tech Knight clearly has kind of a voyeur thing going on. And there's an ongoing motif in The Boys where Hughie ends up with gore on his face more than any other character on that show. He's always the guy that gets splattered. And there was a callback to that in that scene. I'm trying not to be too graphic, right? But up until this point, this says, as far as anyone knows, a consensual sex act. The humor is that Hughie doesn't know the safe word, which turns out to be Zendaya. That's funny. Come on. Spider-Man, Zendaya. That's funny, right? That is legit funny. And the fact that he's trying so hard to play the role, it's kind of gross, but again, he's got a mask on, doesn't actually touch his face. And it's just tickling up until that point, and some bondage. Now, it takes a dark turn when Tech Knight realizes that it's not Hughie and unmasks him, and then, like I said, tries to cast him in a modern remake of Videodrome. If you don't know that reference, that's okay. Fellow Cronenberg fans, get where I'm going at with this. This is one of these things that is very graphic, and it was set up in Gen V that this is a thing Tech Knight does, though we didn't know the extent of it. And so the idea that, yes, Hughie is nearly sexually assaulted by his favorite hero growing up. We don't know if that's even true, right? That may be something Hughie just said to try to get him to stop, or at least delay until his friends can rescue him. It is an attempt. It was not committed. Tech Knight was stopped before he actually committed the act that would have been sexual assault. Still freaking bad. Still dark. Can still leave somebody very, very rattled. But let's flip it around. We like Hughie, which is why we sympathize with Hughie in that scene. But now imagine this from Ashley's point of view. And I mean, Ashley's, you kind of love her. You kind of find her disgusting. She's very messed up. But imagine if she's just a woman who thought she was signing up for consensual kink play with someone who wouldn't judge her, and it turns out a guy snuck in acting against her best interest to record her. That's a real violation when you put it that way. That is not good kink. And if you look at that way, that was a massive violation, boundary violation on Hughie's point of view. I think that because we're inclined to sympathize with Hughie, we don't see him as doing anything wrong here because he's depicted on the receiving end of something that he's not into. However, this is a consent violation. Lying in any way to get someone to engage in a sexual activity is a violation of consent. Ashley did not have complete knowledge to consent to that act with Hughie. That kind of matters. It does. People are like, oh no, you're overthinking it. No, we have this issue, and it's not good for women. It's also not good for men. And this is why I'm talking about this on Manly Monday. This idea that it's okay to lie to get sex because, you know, the self-deprecating, well, that's the only way any woman's going to go for me. That's not true. And if it is true, maybe work on yourself instead of lying. Because if you don't want to get accused of being a shitbag, that's very risky behavior. It's one of those things that is seen as a form of sexual assault in some circles, not in others. And it's obviously not legal unless you give somebody a disease. It's not illegal to lie unless you give somebody a disease. There are court rulings where if you have HIV and you don't disclose, that is considered sexual assault by deception. So we're working on a sliding scale here, but I do agree that the people who say the whole scene is sexual assault, they are kink shaming. That was not the intent. The intent was to show kind of a comically kinky scene where Hughie bit off more than he can chew. Then it takes a dark turn, and the second half of that is not supposed to be funny at all. The Tech Knight heel turn, where he suddenly knows it's Hughie, knows Hughie's not into it, and decides to punish him rather badly, that's not played for laughs. That's important. That's the difference between kink and sexual assault. That's the difference between Hughie's discomfort in the first half of the scene is funny because he put himself there under false pretenses. And the second half of the scene depicted as not funny because then, no, this is a deliberate attempt at a violation. Hopefully that makes sense, because then we get into the second half of this thing where, oh, his friends didn't care. They didn't comfort him. And he had to tell them. He finally broke down. First of all, he broke down over a lot of things. The most significant thing was his dad dying. And that's totally valid. But also, it does say a real truth about how we handle when men are sexually assaulted or there's an attempt, a near miss, like we saw in The Boys. And it was a very realistic depiction of nobody says anything because nobody knows what to say. And they don't want to pity him and they don't want to talk about it until he wants to talk about it. And that's not necessarily wrong. They didn't reject him when he did talk about it. This idea that people are supposed to mind read and push him to talk before he's ready doesn't understand the unique shame dynamics of male victims of sexual assault or male survivors of sexual assault. I work with people. I have friends who had an experience, that's such a euphemism, right? And didn't talk about it for decades. I have other friends who talked about things that happened to them as children. And they got labeled a pedophile for it. It is very fraught when men talk about these things, when men break down, when men show vulnerability. And I do think that this whole season of The Boys has had a level of nuance that people have missed. I mean, the whole Fight Club thing with Butcher, that was, Eileen in the Discord called that really early, so that was not a surprise. We were all kind of watching for it at that point, and it did fit. But there has been a lot of stuff about losing fathers and losing father figures and the self-destructive tendencies that have the self-loathing as well, especially with Butcher, because we saw his family history very early. The fraught relationship with Hughie's family, with his mom coming back into the picture and her emotionally gaslighting him, and, the strained relationship with his father because he took the money and then couldn't live with himself with the settlement with Vought. There's a lot of nuance going on in this season, and they're being so realistic about how people actually handle trauma in a real way, not a Hollywood way, with Kimiko getting blind drunk and Frenchie, Oh my God. That is all kinds of screwed up. Talk about dissociating in so many ways with catastrophic results. And then, like, Hughie needing an obvious scary thing to finally feel something about his father. That's all much more realistic ways that people respond when traumatized, when triggered. You know, a lot of firecracker going down the wrong path was because of the horrendous thing that Starlight did to her when they were teenagers, kids, I don't remember which. But, you know, Firecracker is just living in trauma. And Sage is a product of neglect. She's constantly talking about people not listening to her, people not hearing her. And these are things we don't talk about enough. I work with a lot of men who, I very gently push on, did you feel hurt as a kid? And, they want to talk about something much less personal. And so I'm very gentle. And I try to get it onto an individual level so that I can validate their feelings, right? And there tends to be this indirectness when you're dealing with mainly heterosexual men, but, some gay men as well. It manifests differently. And I have found this to be true in trans men as well as cisgender men, which is really interesting. But yeah, you have to sort of come at it, let it lie for a bit, let them know it's okay if they want to talk about it, but not push. If you push, you lose them because they feel too vulnerable in a bad way before they trust you. And Hughie is constantly feeling like he's a weak link on the team because he doesn't have superpowers. And then, of course, Mother's Milk has had a panic attack so bad he was sent to the hospital. And that kind of got, wiped away by Hughie's breakdown. And obviously, it was a big dramatic moment. We don't know what's going to happen next. But there's a lot going on. And, there's a lot of internalized male disposability going on in with his, it's played somewhat for laughs, but the tragedy, there's a sense, I don't know if they've said it on the show, but they sort of give him OCD type traits. But he's obviously got a lot of anxiety. And so he finally couldn't take it anymore. And the fact that it feels like you're having a heart attack. And, allowing A-Train to have that kind of heroic moment too. A-Train is so tragic. But, Butcher's self-destructiveness coming from his dad being a John Noble character. And Hughie feeling like he needs to be conventionally masculine strong when not only does nobody need that from him, none of the people who are damaged from that life, they want the opposite for him. They want him to stay Hughie. And because none of these emotionally damaged people talk to each other like adults, that never comes out. He never gets that validation. And they really are dealing with almost a Shakespearean tragedy of if anybody actually had a conversation with each other instead of about each other, people would get a much more healthy thing. And it's so weird that all of a sudden people want letter perfect responses from the boys. That makes no sense to me. Like, even if everything they were saying about it was right, that show goes very dark. And if we say, oh no, all these other horrible things that they depict on the show, all of those are okay. And okay to play for laughs. But there are certain things that are so horrible, they're never funny under any circumstance. Well, that indicates to us how much shame is connected to those particular things. I mean, they made fun of Starlight getting, dubconned in the original. We see it as a sexual assault because she was coerced, but the comics make that much clearer. In the show, it's more, she could have walked away. She could have quit the 7. It was dubious, kind of non-consensual, but it's been accepted by the world as she was sexually assaulted. #MeToo, #Believe Starlight. That's playing that for laughs, folks. If it's okay to do to a woman, and, you got a guy having sex with an octopus on this show. You had the human centipede. Like, I really do think that a lot of the reactions that I've seen from left-wing men are actually displacing the real discomfort that they have with this content, which is it's highly sexualized, very, very, if superpowered people could be kinky, these are the things they do. Splitting yourself into 10 parts to masturbate, in a sauna. Anyway, the thing I like about the show is it does tell us something about ourselves, because you have to go in prepared for one of your sacred cows, or possibly a sheep or a chicken, to be skewered. The poor taste is the point. And the people saying that, the political satire is too heavy-handed right now. How the hell can they satirize what's going on with American politics right now and not be heavy-handed? I don't know how it's possible. The fact that they're just quoting verbatim what politicians have said, and, that's too much, you're supposed to be offended. It's satire. There's a reason we say satire is what closes on Saturday night. And I do think that we're seeing some of the, why nobody who's had to deal with very loud male feminists trusts loud male feminists. I support women, until it costs me anything. And that doesn't mean there aren't good ones out there. And I want to be clear. You can care about equality. You can care about the treatment of women. You can want to learn more. You can support these things. But there is a way that seems sincere and embraces the discomfort of being a man navigating these issues. And then there's the guys who are loud and obnoxious about it and lecture other men and even lecture women they don't agree with on these things. I went so many places with memories there. You saw that, like, trauma flashback. No, that wasn't trauma. That was a bad memory. That was a joke. See, I get to joke about that because I have a PTSD diagnosis, and me joking about it helps me cope. There's always been this thing in comedy circles of, is a rape survivor allowed to make rape jokes, right? It's an unsettled question. I mean, I'm wearing a shirt that says, "Judge me by my size, do you?" I got it at Disney World. okay? And there's Yoda wearing mouse ears on the back. I got it outside of Star Tours. But I got this because people judge my intellect by the size of my chest. Okay? So I think it's funny. It's my way of coping with the reality that people are going to think things about me because these grew like this. God has a sense of humor, okay? If other people don't find it funny, if they don't want to joke about elements of their own body, that's okay too. But comedy is a lot like kink in that way. As long as everyone's consenting, it's fair game. And if you don't consent, don't watch. There's no requirement to watch an exceptionally dark action comedy. I really think that the way they're going with these things is more in the spirit of the original comic, which was very rough in places, but they soften people up and they're way off the source material in terms of plot. They're very much loyal to the source material in terms of shock schlock. It's Garth Ennis, right? So this is, you know, the masculinity of the boys is a thing I keep coming back to because the characters are so well fleshed out for a show with a lot of, you know, jib effects and splatter and like it's comedy horror effects. And it really makes me wonder why people are more put off, more horrified by Hughie in bondage gear getting his feet tickled and farting on a cake than we are with A-Train jibbing Hughie's girlfriend in the first episode. Hughie's father just splattered multiple hospital patients. Why do we think that the tickle fetish is the worst thing that has happened to this guy? That is our own judgment being overlaid on the work, not the work itself, not the intent the work stated by the way they set up this scene. We cannot both use death of the author to go, well, I get to see this any way I want. If I say it's sexual assault, it's sexual assault. And use Eric Kripke's comments to Variety as a way to condemn him and say, not funny, man, that's sexual assault. You're making fun of sexual assault. No, there's no intent. There was no intent for that to be sexual assault. It was Hughie somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. I'm very interested in the comments here. I would love to do like a round table with a bunch of guys on the masculinity of the boys. Maybe at the end of the season, maybe when the show wraps. I don't know. Maybe we can do multiple ones. But I'd love, because this is one of these ones I'd love to hear the perspectives of guys on this stuff, because I think it's spectacular. And I'm interested in your thoughts, and I don't have the thing open. Okay. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Wait, I've got the wrong thing up. Crap. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. You can tell I'm nervous about the subject matter because I messed that up. Thanks for watching Manly Mondays.